Sana hindi magloko PLDT ko, Sarah. Okay, just checking if you could hear me. Section B.
Yes po.
Okay, teka, papatayin ko lang po isang gadget para hindi o maingay. Okay, let's start. So if you have any questions, okay, feel free to call my attention. Okay, this orientation, okay, the orientation slides prepared by Dr. Dorlasa, okay, your lecturer for this week. So let's start. Okay, so I'm assigned to discuss the histology of the female reproductive system. Okay, we're going to discuss the histology of the ovary, which is the female gonad, and then you have your, again, so we're going to discuss the histology of the ovary, and then the histology of the fallopian tube here, histology of the uterus, the cervix, and lastly, the vagina. So we're going to focus again on the histological features. Okay, let's start with the histology of the ovary. Okay, so you're going to see two main layers. We call it as the cortex and the medulla. Again, okay, from this part up to this part is the cortex, and this is the medulla. Okay, what will be your guide? The cortex, again, containing the different ovarian follicles at various stages of development. So that will guide you. If you could see the different ovarian follicles, okay, you are at the cortex layer. So we're going to discuss the different layers, the different stages later on. And the medulla is here. This part is the medulla area containing loose connective tissue with blood vessels and nerves. Okay, so again, take note, two layers, cortex and medulla layer. Okay, the ovary is covered with a modified type of epithelium, which is a reflection of the peritoneum. We call it as the germinal epithelium. Some books will also call it as the surface epithelium. Again, germinal epithelium is here, and frequently asked, what is the lining epithelium? It's an example of a simple cuboidal epithelium. Ayaw mag-automatic. Okay, again, so we have your germinal epithelium, you have the cortex, and the medulla. So two main layers, remember, cortex and medulla, and you have to identify again the germinal epithelium. We did mention that at the cortex layer, you have to identify the different follicles, okay, at various stages of development. So expect that we're going to ask you that. So you must be able to identify the stage of development or identify the whole structure. Okay, and then remember that those ovarian follicles are seen at the cortex layer. Okay, do you follow? Section B?
Yes po.
Okay, very good. So again, this is just a representative slide. So here, representative lang po ito. Okay, so this is the cortex layer. This one, containing the ovarian follicles at various stages of development. So we're going to discuss that. You should be able to differentiate again these stages, okay? Seen at the cortex layer. So let's start with the primordial follicle, okay? It's said to be the most primitive or the youngest, okay? And you see, if this is the germinal epithelium, you're going to see the primordial follicles here. Primordial follicles near the germinal epithelium. And notice that, again, the lining epithelium here, it is surrounded by a single layer of follicular cells. Okay? So simple squamous epithelium is the lining epithelium. So that will guide you. Again, if you see a follicle lined by a simple squamous epithelium, the stage of development is a primordial follicle. Okay, so high power magnification. The encircled part here, the encircled part here, again, this is the primordial follicle, the whole structure. And again, it's a primary oocyte actually, which is surrounded by a single layer of follicular cells. So simple squamous epithelium. Primordial follicle. And after that, okay, from a single, again, from a single layer of flat, okay, follicular cells, this will become a single layer of cuboidal cells. And the stage of development is a primary unilaminar follicle. Okay, some books will call it as primary follicle, but for uniformity, we're going to call it as primary unilaminar. Unilaminar. And notice that there is appearance of this structure that will immediately surround the developing egg cell. The pinkish structure, we call it as the zona pellucida. Again, how to differentiate a primordial follicle from a primary unilaminar follicle? Again, what is the lining epithelium if it is a primordial follicle? Try to answer section B.
Simple squamous.
Simple squamous. But if it is a primary unilaminar, a simple cuboidal epithelium. Did you get the difference? Section
Yes
B?
po.
Okay. Again, you should be able to identify the zona pellucida immediately surrounding the developing egg cell. Okay. From a single layer of cuboidal cells, this will be surrounded now by several layers of cuboidal cells. So from primary unilaminar, this will become a primary multilaminar. Okay, as the name implies, it is surrounded by several layers of cube-like cells. Okay, again, this is your zona pellucida immediately surrounding the egg cell, the primary oocyte, okay, and then you have several layers of cuboidal cells, follicular cells. So this type of epithelium here, from simple cuboidal, it will become a stratified cuboidal. So again, very easy to remember. I want you to tabulate it. Primordial follicle, simple squamous, primary unilaminar, simple cuboidal, and primary multilaminar, it is a stratified cuboidal. Okay, next stage. You could see the appearance of the developing space or a cavity. So here, okay, and we call it as anthrome. Okay, anthrome. The primary oocyte is surrounded by several layers of cells, and there's a formation again of spaces. And the space we call it as anthrome. And the stage of development that will guide you to remember that, to identify that, that is your antral follicle. Antral follicle, because you could see the appearance of an anthrome. Okay, so again, so you have your primary oocyte here surrounded by zona pellucida. Okay, and you could see space, anthrome. Stage of development again is an antral follicle. The lining epithelium is still stratified cuboidal epithelium. Okay, so again, inside the anthrome is a fluid, and we call the fluid as liquor folliculoid or pellicular fluid. It's the same. Again, inside the anthrome is a fluid. That fluid is known as liquor folliculi or follicular fluid. Stage of development again, the whole structure is an antral follicle. Okay, so again, what is the structure here? What do you call this structure? That can be specific.
Zona pellucida po.
That's your zona pellucida. Very good. Okay. Within the walls of the developing follicle, okay, you can see here, I think this was mentioned in details in your lecture. Okay, you have your membrana granulosa cells. This one, this part is membrana granulosa. And then you have your theca, which is made up of two layers, called interna, okay, innermost, and the theca externa, outermost. So again, here is your membrana granulosa from this part, and then you have your theca interna, and you have your theca externa. Okay. So the group of cells, okay, group of cells lining the cavity, we call it as immediately, we call it as your membrana granulosa. And then from inside to outside, you have your theca interna, and then you have your theca externa. Okay. This is more or less the appearance of a mature Graafian follicle. Okay. You have a well-developed anthrome here. This part. You have the oocyte, and this stage of development is your secondary oocyte, which is immediately surrounded by zona pellucida, and this one, we call it as your corona radiata. Again, the secondary oocyte is immediately surrounded by zona pellucida. Okay, the group of cells surrounding the secondary oocyte, zona pellucida, we call it as your corona radiata, and this is attached, okay, by a group of cells, okay, we call it as your cumulus ooperus. So we want you to remember that because we're going to ask you that in the practical. So if you're asked, for example, identify the specific structure here, what will you answer? This group of cells, what will be your answer? Section B. What is this
Corona
one?
radiata.
That will be the corona radiata. So if this pointed here, what will be your answer?
Cumulus ooperus po.
Okay, that's your cumulus ooperus. Okay. And earlier we mentioned this group of cells lining the wall, lining the cavity. What is this one? It's your membrana granulosa. Section B, do you follow?
Yes po.
Okay, very good. The stimulus or operus, the group of cells, okay, that will serve as the attachment, okay? And then you have the corona radiata. Okay, that's your membrana granulosa cells, okay? So again here, this is the mature Graafian follicle, which is now ready for ovulation, okay? The encircled structure, the whole structure again, is a mature Graafian follicle. And you have to identify again the parts ulit. That's your secondary oocyte. This is your zona pellucida. This is your corona radiata here. Attachment, we call it as cumulus or operus. And the space again, what do you call the space? Section B. What is the space? Section B, what is that space?
And
Antrum. Okay. Question so far? Section B. Hello po. Question so
None
far?
po.
Okay. Again, if there will be after ovulation, okay, after ovulation, what will happen to the mature Graafian follicle? It will be transformed initially into a corpus luteum. Okay, you have to remember that. Immediately after ovulation, the mature Graafian follicle will be transformed into a corpus luteum. Okay, the whole structure is a corpus luteum, which is made up of two types of cells. Okay, I'm sure this was mentioned in the lecture. Okay, what are the two types of cells? We call it as the theca lutein cells and the granulosa lutein cells. Okay, theca lutein cells and granulosa lutein cells. Granulosa, coming from the membrana granulosa, described as pale staining, large, as compared with theca lutein cells coming from the theca interna. Okay, the theca lutein cells are said to be small and dark staining. Okay, that will help you, that will guide you. The small, dark staining cells, we call it as theca lutein, while the large, pale staining, we call it as the granulosa lutein cells. Okay? Clear po?
Yes po.
Okay, the theca lutein cells will secrete androstenedione, okay, while granulosa lutein cells will secrete estrogen and progesterone. I think this was mentioned already during your endocrine, histology of the endocrine system. I'm sure this was mentioned already. Okay, so again, after ovulation, the mature Graafian follicle transformed into a corpus luteum. Okay, the corpus luteum, what will happen? Okay, will be transformed into a scar, fibrous tissue, and we call it as corpus albicans. Again, corpus luteum transformed into a scar, we call it as the corpus albicans. So let's review again before we go to the next organ. Okay. So you have your primordial follicles, the most immature. What will be the lining of primordial follicle? The primary oocyte is surrounded by a single layer of flat follicular cells. So this is lined by simple squamous. Okay. Primary unilaminar. Primary unilaminar is lined by a single layer of cuboidal cells, cube-like. And then again, you have the appearance of the zona pellucida. Okay. Your growing is otherwise known as primary multilaminar, is surrounded by a several layers of cuboidal cells. Cuboidal cells, stratified cuboidal. Antral, sorry, antral, you have the appearance of antral. Spaces will be formed, okay? We call it as your antral follicle. And here is your mature Graafian follicle. So you have to go back to the parts of a mature Graafian follicle. We did mention, okay, try to identify again the secondary oocyte surrounded immediately by zona pellucida, and the zona pellucida is surrounded by corona radiata, okay? And that structure will be attached. You have a mound of cells here that will serve as attachment. We call it as the cumulus or operus, okay? After ovulation, what will happen to the mature Graafian follicle? It will become a corpus luteum, okay? And after that, the corpus luteum will be transformed into a scar. We call it as the corpus albicans. And again, those structures, all those structures will be seen in what layer of the ovary? The answer will be cortex, ovarian cortex. Any questions regarding the slide of ovary?
None po.
None
Okay,
po.
very good. Let's go now to the second organ. We call it as the fallopian tube. You can also call it as, okay, fallopian tube, okay, oviduct, pwede rin sabing oviduct, okay, fallopian tube, but we're going to call it as fallopian tube, okay? So two on the sides of the uterus, okay? So the wall of the oviduct, that's the other name of the fallopian tube. It's made up of a mucosa, okay, with a thick tunica muscularis and it's covered with tunica serosa. Again, those are the layers. Mucosa, which is thrown into folds, and then you have your tunica muscularis, and then you have your tunica serosa. Okay, again, the mucosa, we did mention that the mucosa is thrown into folds, okay? So, for example, here, and take note that the lining epithelium is a simple columnar epithelium. Simple columnar epithelium. So here is the lining epithelium, which is made up of two types of cells. Two types of cells lining the epithelium. We call it as your columnar ciliated cells, and the non-ciliated cells, we call it as PEG cells. Again, two types of cells lining the epithelium. You have your columnar, so I want you to imagine that columnar with cilia, hair-like projections, which are motile. Okay, what will be the purpose of the cilia? Do you still remember those apical projections? What are purpose? What is the purpose of those cilia? Para saan? Para saan kaya yung mga ciliated cells? Section B,
It helps to move the egg po.
okay, yes. Tama. Okay, parang tinutulak niya, di ba? Okay. And the PEG cells are secretory cells. Okay, secretory. This will serve as the source of nutrition, okay, of the egg cells, or in case there will be fertilization, this will serve as the nutrition of the zygote, the developing zygote. Okay. Again, so here, again, higher magnification, you're going to see again the two types of cells, the secretory, sorry, the columnar cells with hair-like projections, okay, and the secretory without cilia, non-ciliated, we call it as PEG cells. Okay. Beneath the lining epithelium is the lamina propria, which is made up of loose connective tissue. Immediately beneath the lining epithelium. And then you have your tunica muscularis layer, which is made up of circular and longitudinal layers. And the serosa, which is made up of serosa is a thin mesothelium. I hope you still remember the meaning of mesothelium. If it is mesothelium, it is lined by a simple squamous epithelium. So try to concentrate here on the mucosa layer. Okay, I want you to imagine that. So this is one of folds of the mucosa, which is made up again of two types of cells. Okay, what are the two types of cells? Columnar ciliated cells, and the other one is the non-ciliated, which is secretory. We call it as PEG cells. So palagi po yung tinatanong ha, it's even as in the board exam, ang simple ng tanong, PEG cells are seen in what organ? So the answer will be fallopian tube. Any questions regarding fallopian tube?
No
Opo.
questions po.
Okay. Again, higher magnification of the fallopian tube. So you could see here the foldings of the mucosa. Okay. The lining epithelium again is simple columnar. Okay. Ciliated. Two types of cells again, columnar ciliated cells, and the other one will be PEG cells. Okay, let's go now to the uterus. Okay, the uterus. The mucosa, okay, in the uterus is called as endometrium. Again, the mucosa of the uterus is termed as endometrium. Tunica muscularis is termed as myometrium. Okay, you have to remember that. The lining epithelium is still the same. It's a continuation actually of the lining epithelium of the fallopian tube. Simple columnar epithelium with ciliated and secretory cells. But you can see here the presence of numerous glands. Okay, we call it as the uterine glands, located, embedded within the endometrium. And you will notice that you have a very thick muscular layer, which is made up of smooth muscles. We call it as the myometrium. Okay, again, this is the myometrium, which is made up of smooth muscle fibers. I think we're not going to ask you anymore whether the endometrium is in the proliferative, secretory, or menstrual phase. But theoretically, you should know that, and I'm sure, okay, I'm sure that was discussed in details by Dr. Borlasa, okay? Theoretically, again, you should know the differences between a proliferative, okay, secretory, and menstrual stages of the endometrium, okay, uterine cycle. Because there will be differences. But practically, we're not going to ask you that anymore. But you have to know, of course, that this is the endometrium. Yun ang siguro itatanong sa inyo ni Dr. Sarah. What layer is this one? That will be the endometrium. What is the organ? Uterus. And these structures, what are those glands? We call it as your uterine glands. Was it mentioned in the lecture? What osteomorphology? What type? Osteomorphology, the uterine glands is an example of what type of gland? Osteomorphology. Was it mentioned during the lecture? Section B, Section B, natulog na yata ng Section B. Hello po.
Walang
Kaya
sumasagot.
nga eh. Ano ba yan? Hindi ko
Ano
hindi ko nasasabihin sa inyo yung tatanong ni Dr. Sara.
Oo,
Tinuturuan ko na nga
sige
kayo eh.
na. Kung ayaw makinig, hayaan na. Talaga tong mga to, oo, hindi lang. Hindi sumasagot.
Oo
Oo.
nga.
Ano ba yan?
Section B. Kami na lang dalawa ni Dr. Sara at ni Dr. Bravo at ni Dr. Matthews na lang yata nandito.
Parang sindak na sila, no? Wala pa tayong prelim.
Kaya, hindi na nagsasalita tong mga to.
Nagmo-monologue si Dr. Bibar.
Yeah. Dr. Bravo, wala pang neuro. Paano kaya pag sa neuro na to?
Ewan ko, baka sila himatayin na.
Pambawi nga itong
Pwede naman
histology. Pambawi nga itong histology eh.
blink your eye once if you answer is yes, twice if no. Pwede naman.
Pwede nga
Ay,
magtanong.
naku, Sara, hindi na ako magtatanong. Dire-diretso na nga lang ako.
Oo
Sige
nga,
na nga.
hayaan na
Hindi
sila.
naman tatanong sila kung makinig
Dead
sila o
man.
ayaw. Dead man. Section B. Okay. Kaya ako kayo tinatanong para alam ko na naintindihan nyo, di ba? So, I assume naintindihan nyo. Di ba? So, dapat perfect kayo sa practical, ha? Okay. So, again, the layers of the uterus. The mucosa is known as endometrium. Sa uterus lang yan, ha? Baka sumagot kayo ng endometrium sa fallopian tube. Only, again, at the organ uterus. The tunica muscularis layer is myometrium. But the outermost is still called as tunica serosa. Okay? So, know the lining epithelium, know the pictures. Serosa, okay, we can call it as your perimetrium. Perimetrium. So, same layers, but we call it as endometrium, myometrium, and perimetrium. I'm sure if we're going to focus the organ, we're going to focus on this part. We have to show you the lining epithelium, endometrium, and myometrium. It will be very difficult for you if we're going to focus it this way, okay? And we're going to ask you to identify the organ, okay? If we're going to focus the perimetrium or the serosa, we have to show you a scanner view para malaman yung uterus. Okay? On the lower part of the uterus, the organ is cervix, which is made up of two parts. Endo to the inside and exo to the outside to continue with the vagina. Okay? It's very easy to identify, differentiate the two. All you have to do is to look at the lining epithelium. Lining epithelium. The lining epithelium of endocervix is just a continuation of the lining epithelium of the uterus. Simple columnar epithelium. And you could see her glands, okay? And we call it specifically as cervical glands. In the uterus, we call it as uterine glands, but in the endocervix specifically, we call it as cervical glands, okay? It's a mucus secreting gland. On the other hand, the exocervix is lined by stratified non-keratinized epithelium, which is continuous with the lining epithelium of the vagina. Okay, so this one, this area is the junction between the endocervix and the exocervix. So this is the most important thing to remember here. For you to identify the organ, we have to show you the junction between the endocervix and the exocervix. So take note again, the endocervix is continuation of the uterus, while the exocervix will continue to become the vagina. Take note of the lining epithelium. Okay, The glands, I'm sure also, this was mentioned in the lecture, the mucus secreting glands in the cervix, we call it as cervical glands, mucus secreting. Again, exocervix and endocervix. Okay, last slide will be the slide of vagina. Okay. Same layers, mucosa, lining epithelium, and a very thick muscular layer, okay, and tunica adventitia. No glands here, okay. The lining epithelium is stratified squamous, non-keratinized. Stratified squamous, non-keratinized epithelium. So how will you differentiate endocervix from vagina? Both are lined by stratified squamous, non-keratinized epithelium. Again, sa endocervix, okay. Endocervix, again, what is the lining? Sorry. What is the lining epithelium of endocervix?
Simple columnar po.
Very good. And exocervix, what is the lining epithelium? Same with the vagina. Stratified squamous, non-keratinized. So if we're going to show you that, let's go back ha, balikan po natin ha. Baka magkamali po kayo eh. Previous. So if we focus this way, so you don't have to answer as vagina. Kasi nandito ka po sa junction. Okay? So nasa taas ka pa. Okay? You are at the junction between your endocervix and exocervix. So this, the organ focus here is cervix, not vagina, because you still could see the junction between your endocervix and exocervix. But it is purely this one, okay? You have to answer as vagina. Take note that one guide for you to identify this one, you have a very thick muscular layer. That will help you to remember that. That will help you to remember the organ. Very thick muscular layer, and I'm sure by this time, you know how to identify a stratified epithelium. So isa lang naman pinakita namin sa inyo yung stratified epithelium. Okay? Stratified squamous epithelium. And that will be the slide, the organ of vagina. Stratified squamous, non-keratinized. You have to include this one. Stratified squamous, non-keratinized epithelium. So if we ask you for the lining epithelium of the vagina specifically. Okay? So high power magnification again. This is the organ, vagina. The lining again is stratified squamous, non-keratinized. I think that will be the last slide. Okay. Still, the organ is vagina. You can see here, immediately beneath the lining will be the lamina propria here. Okay, the lamina propria basically is made up of a loose connective tissue, which is rich in elastic fibers. Okay. And this one, again, starting from this part, will be the muscular layer, the tunica muscularis layer. Tunica muscularis again, it's made up of two layers, but you cannot really differentiate the circular and longitudinal layers because, again, these two, but the circular is inner. Sorry, you have your circular and you have your longitudinal. Okay, circular, and then you have your longitudinal. Circular near the mucosa and longitudinal near the adventitia. What type of muscle is this one? It's also an example of a smooth muscle. Okay, clear po? So what are the layers of the vagina again? This is the mucosa, which is made up of lining epithelium and lamina propria. Okay, And then you have the tunica muscularis, which is made up of circular and longitudinal layers. Okay, questions po?
Wala po.